More analysis on this. Let's bring in Greg Swenson in Chicago. He is a partner at the Brigg Macadam corporate finance firm. Thanks very much for being with us. So, first of all, what do you make now of these new announcements on the tariffs from the administration?
Yeah, I think there's some healthy debate going on in the administration between, some of the different players in the process. I think Scott Bessent, the Secretary of the Treasury, has done a fantastic job of kind of hearing from different arguments or different parts of the administration on what to do. And I think President Trump is not afraid to pivot when he thinks it's important to do that. So in many ways, I'm glad to see a lot of these items having exceptions to those items that would, initially hurt the U.S. consumer. So I think, look, I know the markets and CIOs and CFOs would rather have some clarity. And I think ultimately, it might be a few more days, a few more weeks. We get some clarity so at least people know how to make decisions. And in the meantime, just the changes, the constant changing, I know that makes it difficult for markets who don't like uncertainty and CEOs and CFOs who have to make these decisions.
Now, so the intention from the administration as far as the smartphone tariffs is that they say they want smartphones to be built in the United States. Is that a realistic goal? And if that were to happen, how long would it take?
Yeah, I mean, impossible for me to speculate, but I know that Apple is committed to a $1 trillion investment in the U.S. So I think there's some pretty solid understanding from the corporate leadership in the U.S. that this is a national security issue. It's not just economics, and it's really important that critical electric inputs are made in the U.S. that extends to rare earth metals, any other critical minerals, and electronics. So if it's something that much of the same inputs or many of the same inputs that are used in mobile phones are also used in guided missile systems and other military technology. So I do think that there's a credible argument that our adversary in China we should not be dependent on them for those kind of inputs.
And if we talk more specifically about the trade war between the U.S. And China, who is better equipped to come out on top here?
That's a great question, and it is most obviously the United States. The United States imports right now 5 times as much as China imports from us. So we are not as dependent on China. It's roughly 1.5% of GDP, whereas for China, it's significantly higher. It's still the biggest consumer market in the world, the United States. It's anywhere from 35 to 40% of global consumption. And the Chinese economy is still terribly dependent on the United States. So a trade war between two countries where one has a massive trade surplus is always going to favor the country with the trade deficit.
But the problem, I mean, the criticism that has been made of all of these tariffs in general is that it is consumers who are going to be hit with all of this, because once these goods are brought into the United States and the import tariffs are put on them, the importers are going to pass that on to consumers, and that they will be paying more for smartphones and things like that, and then that's going to have a knock-on effect on the whole economy. So, I mean, is this the wisest thing to be doing in the end?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately it is for other reasons. There might be some pain at the purse for U.S. consumers, but I do think that many of the consumers are willing to pay a little bit more for items. We've just become accustomed to getting cheap goods from China. But more importantly, it doesn't necessarily mean that all of the tariffs are passed through. First of all, the tariffs are charged on the wholesale price. So if the wholesale price is $5 and the retail price is $25, then the tariff amount on the $5 isn't that meaningful. According to MIT, only 20% of the tariffs are passed through. So on a 10% tariff, for example, only 2% would be passed through to the consumer. 4% is borne by the producer. 4% is by the currency adjustment that comes from these things. So, in the first term, when President Trump was putting tariffs on Chinese items, the 20% tariffs resulted in a 0.7% increase. So I think this will be more of perhaps a one-time price adjustment, but it's not inflationary. At least the data doesn't necessarily prove that. So we'll see. I don't imagine that the president is interested in creating inflation. That's for sure. What we've learned from the last 4 years, the real reason for inflation is reckless spending and hostility to the supply side. And I think this president is very conscious of that. That's why he has tax reform, deregulation. Those things are very, very well, not only are they great for GDP growth and especially more importantly, wage growth, real wage growth, but they also help with inflation because you're producing more widgets, and that's important to this president. So I'm not suggesting there isn't going to be some pass through to the consumer, but it's not as meaningful as a lot of the critics on the left are arguing.
Good to get your thoughts on this, Craig Swenson. Thanks very much for being with us.
Thanks for having me. Great to be here.